Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo, ba ba. Who's the man who will speak the truth? Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo, ba ba. Lone candles that burn. Who's the man who will bring light into your life? Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo. Ba-ba, lone candles that burn. Who's the man who digs through human excrement to present you the gems? Boo, ba-ba, ba-boo, ba-boo, ba-ba, lone candles that burn. Who's the man who kinda sometimes knows what he's talking about? Boo, ba-ba, ba-ba-da-boo. Ba-ba, lone candles that burn. Who's the man who has a scatterbrained, low IQ, and weak memory recall? Boo, ba-ba, ba-ba-da-boo. Ba-ba, lone candles that burn. Who's the man who plays games and complains that he sucks at them? Boo, ba-ba, ba-ba-da-boo, ba-ba, lone candles that burn. Well, hello, and welcome to yet another episode of Reply Guyan with Lone Candle. Now, this is mainly a politics, philosophy, society, economics, etc. channel. But today we're talking about something that probably might fall under philosophy, I guess, a little bit, but it's getting pretty close to actually like physics and stuff, like hard science, at least in that direction. Basically what I'm saying is I'm going to even know what I'm talking about less than normal. But I think it's an interesting topic. And I had some pretty lengthy Reply Guyan conversations. Not a lot of back and forth, but the posts are long. So let's try to make sense of it. Okay. So here I was Reply Guyan to Why Materialism is Complete Nonsense by Bernardo Kastrup, who's being interviewed on the Alex O'Connor channel. It's a good channel. Talk about religion and atheism and stuff like that. All right. So first, I guess a quick overview. So this is not going to be accurate per se, and certainly we'll leave out stuff. I don't even know if I fully understand what Mr. Kastrup is saying. Actually, I know that I don't fully understand what Mr. Kastrup is saying, but I do want to give a gist of what his argument is, so we at least have an idea of what we're talking about before we dig into the comments. So, materialism. That's the idea that everything is made up of material. It's all hard matter rather than experience, ideas. And so, the tricky thing comes is when we think about ourselves and we think about what we're thinking. We think about the words, the thoughts, the images in our head that we look and we see things and we are experiencing that. Well, that experience, that consciousness, that your brain is actually about something, that experience itself certainly seems like it's more than just matter. Now, we know we have a brain, we know the brain's complicated, but the brain is clearly material. We know that the brain is material. But what it produces seems to be of a completely different kind. It appears to be a mental kind that even if produced by the material is of a different kind. And that's weird. How is that even possible? That's confusing. And so one way to deal with that is just say, no, it's all material somehow. Yeah, I know it seems like it's a mental state, but it's somehow still all material. The other is a dualism, where you say, no, there's two different kinds. There's the material kind, and there's the mental kind. And of course, the issue there is, well, how does the material creates the mental? Even if we don't fully understand the brain, I mean, close, but even if we knew exactly how the brain worked, and we could even reproduce it, we would know how to reproduce it and know where to put the atoms in order to create consciousness, but we wouldn't really know how it creates consciousness, how this mental stuff is created. So Kastrup says in his theory, I don't know if he invented it or not, but the theory he's talking about is analytic idealism. And it's that, well, no, it's not that everything's material or that there's material and ideal and mental states. It's that it's all mental states. There is no material. It's all mental states. And of course, that's kind of mind-blowing. But this isn't some religious theory. He treats it as a serious scientific theory to try to explain the world. And he says that this is much simpler because it's more parsimonious. Because without thinking everything's mental state, we have to have two basic kinds of things. We have to have matter, or we have to have material things, and mental things. And that's confusing, and it doesn't fit the data well. It doesn't provide a satisfying answer. While idealism is everything is mental. So yes, we are conscious beings and our brains produce some sort of consciousness and mentalness, but everything out there in the world is also mental. It's produced by the universal mind. The universal mind connects to everything, including this chair I'm sitting in right here, including this cup. It's all a part of the universal mind. So somehow this cup is mental because the universal mind is what actually creates it. I don't know exactly why that makes sense, but that is the theory. Did I want to say anything else in preamble? I don't know. I can always come back to that. Since my mind went blank for a second. Let's scroll down. So first I'm going to go over a few comments that didn't really have any conversations, and then I'm going to come over to another tab where I had like the long conversations. So I said, is the problem really just a lack of intuition? What's the evidence that a chair has a mental state? It seems like a theory and evidence problem. And so Kastrup argues that, yeah, people are resistant to accepting that his theory is correct because, we grow up in a world where we think matter is real. And that makes it really hard to accept, like, oh, actually, no, it is real, but it's not material. Material doesn't actually exist. It's all mental. And so we resist that, even though his theory clearly best explains the evidence, is what he says. And it's people have a lack of intuition. And they mentioned in the video that the chair he's in has a mental state. It doesn't have its own mental. It's a part of the universal mental. But I'm like, seems like we don't really have evidence of that. It's purely a theory, basically a theory to try to explain things. But to do that, you got to invent this universal mental state that somehow this chair has mental in it. It's produced by mental. Are you sure it's just an intuition problem? So I was trying to create some sort of objection there. And this comment, we deal with that in other comments. So we might as well just wait till we get to the other ones. I don't see why a universal mental thing that disassociates and can feel needles in chairs, because he said the universal mental, if you stabbed a chair, it would somehow feel it. It would be aware of it. I don't see why a universal mental thing that disassociates, disassociates. So it's all one mental. But our brains somehow disassociate from the universal mental to create a self, to create our own consciousness that has thoughts and feelings and hopes and dreams and recognizes itself as a self. So all brains on Earth, they actually separated themselves somehow from the universal mental. And this separation is called the disassociation. So rather than what a materialist would think was that the brain creates consciousness, he's like, no, mental already exists. It just creates the disassociation from the universal mental, is what Kastrup would argue. And okay, so I said, I don't see why a universal mental thing that disassociates and can feel needles in chairs and human minds can temporarily spit off of is a more simple explanation than then matter is deep down probability fields, and when matter comes together in complicated ways, it creates consciousness. This seems more parsimonious than inventing a universal mental force that works in a variety of ways. So a big part of argument, if this argument, is that it fits the data better, and that's hard for me to judge because I'm not aware of all the experiments and stuff. But a big part of that, which is something I can think about, is parsimony. And of course, as I said earlier, it's more parsimonious because you don't need mental and material. It's just mental. That's more simple. But I look at this and I think, well, this big universal mental, which isn't like a separate God. It isn't like a separate God. It is just a part of everything. So it's a characteristic of everything. But I don't know. There's some line between, I'm adding a new thing and I'm changing a characteristic of something. But at some point, if you change the characteristic of everything so greatly, you're almost creating an own thing. Like the characteristic is the mental, universal mental. Universal mental, is it really just a characteristic of everything? Or is it actually a thing, just a thing that consists of everything? Which means it's not any more parsimonious because you got to add the universal mental. And then it seems pretty complicated because, it can be disassociated and it can somehow notice when it's stabbed by a chair. That's all not just complicated, but that's other things, other factors that move. Those are other variables. How it works isn't in a simple. It's a. I don't know, but it feels like we're bringing in unparsimonious things in an attempt to be parsimonious. We talk about that more later, so don't worry. Me cutting myself off there will not end that discussion. All right, so don't worry. We'll get back to that with apparently smart people talking to me in this one. All right, because the people I'm talking to here, they clearly understand cross-drop theory better than I do. And so I actually learned stuff from the commenters, which is pretty rare. Okay, another comment I said is, I don't understand why he says the ripple on the lake is not there. It is just a lake. It is just a lake. Well, I don't know what I'm saying. The ripple is there. Yeah, I think I wrote something wrong there. We can see it and identify it and describe it. It is this thing we call a ripple on a lake. It is both a part of the lake and not simply reducible to the lake. So he likes to use an example of, there's a ripple on the lake. The ripple on the lake isn't like some new thing. It's still the lake. And I don't fully understand that point because the ripple of the lake is a thing. Yes, it's part of the lake. But if you have a flat lake and then you have a lake with a ripple, you've added something to the lake. There's something else there. Yes, it's a part of the lake, but it's also a new thing, and that thing is called a ripple. And so I didn't really understand his point there. All right, here we get the ones a lot of people are responding to, and I think they might be responding to multiple things I said, but they just put all in one comment. I don't know, you get some pretty lengthy things here. Unfortunately, it's all out of order because that's how YouTube works. But oh yeah, that's way out of order because, maybe not. Maybe not. We'll see. First, let's start with what I said here. If we fully understood all the material workings of the brain and then didn't have an explanation of consciousness, then going away from materialism to explain human consciousness would make sense. But we don't fully understand even how the material nature of the brain fully works. We understand some things, but the mass of neurons is very complicated and we don't understand it. It's quite plausible that consciousness arises from this complicated material thing that we don't fully understand called the brain. So the point I'm trying to make is, like if we fully understand the brain or how does this produce? Be like, well, we need another theory. For this point, the most straightforward explanation of consciousness is, we know that everything that seems to be conscious, everything that seems to be conscious has a brain. These brains are very complicated and we don't know how they work. It's probably that brain. It's probably the brain producing consciousness and not that actually there's and not that somehow everything is conscious and mental. That doesn't seem to be the most straightforward answer. And you really, if you're going to argue that, you need a good argument. And I'm not sure just saying, it vaguely fits the evidence better, or well, it's more parsimonious, is enough to overcome that. Anyways, Starbop says, you've articulated what most thoughtful materialists believe, and that's precisely where analytic idealism offers a subtle but important shift. You're absolutely right that we don't fully understand the brain, but note that the difficulty isn't just complexity, it's category. Even if we mapped every neuron and simulated every electrochemical event, the map would still be third-person data. It would still leave open why that activity is accompanied by first-person experience, why it feels like anything to be that system. That's the hard problem of consciousness. That's the hard problem in a strict sense. It's not about lack of detail, but about the explanatory gap between structure and subjectivity. Hold on. Hello? Hey, I'm trying to get a stream in before you get home. Yeah, you're live. I mean, you're not a speakerphone, but I'm live. Millions of people are watching me right now. Millions! Just checking if you already have dinner. I'm probably good. What were you thinking of getting, though? We have vegetables and pasta and stuff, but maybe I'll get chicken or something. Okay. But all right, where was I? Okay, yeah, I just finished this paragraph. So yeah, that's the really tricky thing and I did mention this earlier, even if we completely knew how the brain worked, like we're like, yep, we do this and that, and we can produce a system that, as far as we can tell, is conscious. I guess it'd be hard to know for sure that it was conscious unless you had a way to project its consciousness somehow. And so you know it's conscious because you can see its thoughts. Well, I don't know what the implications of that are, but it wouldn't be clear why it even needs to create consciousness. Why can't we just move around and be ourselves and make decisions without experiencing a decision? Like, why does it require experience rather than just the brain doing calculate what it needs to do? It doesn't even think this, but it's just doing that. It's just doing what it needs to do in order to help it survive and reproduce, rather than having an experience and a consciousness that's like, hey, I have this little projection of everything and I think about it. And then you can even go further and know who I am. And so what he's saying is, even if we knew everything about the brain, that answer wouldn't be solved. We would still just be like, yeah, but why does it produce experience? Yeah, we understand the order and the structure that makes it, but why does it? What even is experience? There would still be a question there. Earlier I made a God of the Gaps comment, which I obviously missed somewhere, but that's okay. He's responding to it here. This isn't God of the Gaps. Idealism doesn't fill an empirical gap with metaphysics. It points out that the gap is conceptual and unbridgeable by definition. You can't even in principle derive experience from quantities, because quantities describe relations within experience. Consciousness is what measurement already presupposes, the condition for there being any data at all. I don't know if I'm understanding that at this very moment, but earlier I made another comment that's lost somewhere, is that I hear Kastrup explaining this, and it feels like a God of the Gaps explanation. And the God of the Gaps is, so we have science, and it slowly explains more and more, but there's some things it doesn't explain, or maybe that it will never explain. And then someone goes in, oh yes, well, God, and when they say God, they often mean, the Christian God, the Muslim God. So it's not even God in general. Sometimes God in general, but often it's the God of my religion. He did that. And it's like, no, that's a huge mistake. We've been making those mistakes for a long time. And when we used to think it was titans or some people did, that shook the ground and made earthquakes. We thought Zeus made lightning. We thought one of the goddesses had to go down into hell to cry and mourn and she was the goddess of like plants and stuff. And so that's what creates winter. And of course, that's all nonsense. We now understand actually what creates those things. And that was a mistake. And there are some things science will probably never be able to explain. But just as it didn't make sense to make up some sort of conscious being, it doesn't make sense to make up a conscious being now. It's almost surely not going to be true. Because, by the way, making up a conscious being is a very complicated thing. And it's usually a mistake. It's a huge jump to a conclusion. Sure, you could say, hey, maybe it's a god that did it. And yeah, you could say maybe it is. But that's never a good explanation. And so this sounds like that. It's not exactly that. And they're actually not making up a god. I don't know how clear I made this, but the universal mind isn't, and Castro made this clear in this interview, it's not like us. It doesn't think. It doesn't care about things. It doesn't have hopes or dreams. It doesn't even feel in the same way. It is just experience. It's universal experience. And so it's not really a god in that sense. I mean, obviously God is defined in different ways, so obviously you might use that word, but it wouldn't be a god like it's described like in the Christian religion. So it's less a god of the gaps and more of just an attempt at a theoretical explanation. But I can't help but feel we have this hard problem, and so we throw up our hands and go, well, what if it's all experience? I know that doesn't make any sense based on how we actually perceive the world, but this theory does seem to fit the data. But to me, it kind of feels like we're making the god of the gaps a mistake again. Yes, you can see that it fits the data, but frankly, making up a conscious god can fit the data, just in a much more less parsimonious way, since conscious God's a lot more, it's a lot bigger thing to make up. Okay, when analytic idealism says the universe is mental, it's not claiming that chairs have secret thoughts or that matter vanishes if you stop looking. It's saying that what we call matter is the public aspect of mental processes, the stable patterns that conscious activity takes when observed from the outside. The chair doesn't have an inner life. It's an expression within the same field that gives rise to all experiences. It's a mental state. Its mental state is simply its mode of being within that field, not a private subject like you or me. So it's important to remember that everything we experience, we don't experience directly. And this isn't just idealism. Materialists would accept this too. Like when I have my eyes open and I'm seeing my computer, and right now I'm holding this cup in front of me and I see this cup, I'm not directly seeing the cup. My eyes are translating the visual impression of the cup and presenting it as an image of the cup in my brain. And yes, I think the cup is directly causing that image, but I'm not directly seeing the cup. And that's true for everything our brain feels and sees of all of our senses. So we don't directly experience anything. We indirectly experience as our brain presents us. It translates whatever signals it gets into some sort of experience, like the experience of seeing this cup. And so he's saying that one thing that it makes things look like, it doesn't just translate the wavelengths of whatever light is captured or not captured into colors. It doesn't just translate the wavelengths of vibration into sound. It also translates a mental, which is what this actually is. It's actually a mental thing. At its very base, it's mental, and it translated into the appearance of material. And so we're not directly experiencing material, is just what the brain creates. But really, everything is mental. And this sounds really crazy, but one thing I meant to mention off the top, this stuff it gains some plausibility in my mind once you're aware of the double slit experiment. And I'm not going to explain the whole thing. Look it up if you don't know what that is. But apparently, it's well attested to. And basically, even a materialist would accept that what matter is actually a probability field. Yeah. Matter is a probability field like a wave, and then when that probability field is observed or measured or interacted with or something like that, it substantiates. Now, a materialist would say it substantiates into material. Well, an idealist would say, well, no, None of that is material. But that's very weird. If matter, like, if this wasn't being interacted with, it would just be a probability field, and that's apparently what, like, every scientist who studies says, yeah, that checks out with the experiments. And when you read the experiment, you watch some videos about it, it makes sense. Whoa, the world's really crazy. Well, I don't even know what matter is in that case. And it makes weird things like this, at least sound more plausible when you understand how even material matter isn't really material in some sense. All right. So the claim isn't that mind explains what science can't yet explain. It's that science already works entirely within mind. The measurements, models, and theories are all experiences of regularities in consciousness. Materialism interprets those regularities as evidence for unconscious stuff outside experience. Idealism interprets them as evidence of order within experience itself. Complexity doesn't solve the hard problem. It multiplies correlations. Idealism isn't appealing to mystery, but to parsimony. It removes the assumption of an experienced world made of non-experiential stuff. A chair isn't a thinker, but its existence, like every datum in physics, occurs in and through consciousness, the one phenomenon we never step outside of. The question isn't whether matter exists, it's what matter really is once we stop taking the interface for the territory. And there, the interface is referring to, like I was referred to before, our brain. Our brain is the interface, but what's actually out there. We're seeing everything through the interface of our brain, but what's actually out there? And sometimes I use the word material and matter interchangeably, and you just have to get context to know what I mean. But obviously, they both believe in matter. It's just one says matter is actually mental. The other says matter is material. And sometimes I say matter, I mean material. And hopefully context clues make that clear. Let's make sure this is me responding to Starbubs. All right, so here's my response to Starbubs. So I get that what matter isn't. Oh, well, that sentence doesn't make sense. Good job, Lone Candle. I get that what matter isn't how we experience it. Matter is basically all probability fields that substantiate when interacted with or measured or observed. I don't see how the best theory is then everything is mental process or something like that. If we fully mapped out the brain and could even reproduce consciousness from that understanding, yeah, at some fundamental level, we'd still not know why exactly that formation of neurons leads to consciousness, similar to we don't know why matter is a probability field. We just have shown that it is. But I don't see why what follows from this is everything is a mental process. I think that implies everything is mental. I don't think that implies everything is mental, but just uncertainty. Yeah. So both in the sense, the underlying how the double slit experiment showed that everything's kind of a probability field at the quantum level, and basically the hard problems of consciousness. To me, there's a lot of things we really don't understand, and my conclusion is uncertainty. But maybe it's because I haven't dealt enough with this idealist theory to really get my mind around it. But to me, the logical conclusion is a high level of uncertainty, not that everything is mental. Is the point I'm trying to make there anyways. Whether the gap is an empirical gap or a more fundamentally unbridgeable one, it doesn't follow that God or idealism is the answer. It's an unknown. Maybe it's all the universal mental and human consciousness somehow disassociates from it somehow in the brain. But that's speculation. God-like speculation of a gap is God of the gap's thinking, irrespective of what creates the gap. So this is me responding about being God of the gap, saying it's very similar, God of the gap. Or at least it feels similar. I don't know if it's the same or not, but it certainly feels like we don't understand this. So let's say it's something mental. And then let's argue it's parsimonious. All right. We also don't know what we'll figure out if we do map all the neurons. We may be able to reproduce consciousness, although I suppose we still wouldn't know if we are creating consciousness from material or using material to disassociate from the universal mental. I'm just saying, even the extent of what we'll figure out is uncertain, and what seems unbridgeable now may not really be, although I suppose there'll be another layer behind that we can observe even if we can't fully explain. So all I'm trying to say here is, so he made the point is, if we knew everything, it still wouldn't answer the hard problem. And you know what? I think we really don't know what the hell we're going to find out if we ever fully understand how the brain works. It might be that to fully understand how the brain works, we have to develop theories, have to develop techniques, and have just learnings that it's hard for us to even imagine. Like, we don't really know what it's going to be like. That we might have this other level of understanding that it's hard for us to imagine now. And I'm just holding out a possibility of that, even though I'm sure he'd say, no, it's fundamentally, you can't figure out that, even if you knew everything. But I feel like there's uncertainty still there. And so I wanted to throw that in there. Could be wrong about that. So I don't see how we can conclude that a chair has mental processes, or that the universal mental state feels it when a chair is stabbed. That seems like a big speculative guess, not parsimonious theory. Complexity doesn't solve the hard problem, but it does create fundamental uncertainty about how something works. Not complexity itself, but when something like the brain is so complex that we may never understand it, it leaves open the possibility that the brain really is creating the experience of consciousness, even if we don't know how. I think an idealist has a similar problem. How does the brain create a disassociated consciousness? I don't think creating a universal mind state is parsimonious. That's a big new thing that is hard to square with anything else. And parsimony only works if it fits the data. Having consciousness only arise in things that appear to be conscious fits us experiencing consciousness as things with brains, and the plausibility that other creatures with brains are also conscious. Saying a rock somehow has mental state, and that there is a universal mental state, and that the things we think of as conscious are just disassociated consciousness whose brains somehow are involved in this disassociating from the universal mental state, seems like we are just making stuff up. And yeah, the universal mind, I mean, you're adding a whole layer of how things work. And I don't think you get to escape that as a thing you're talking about in your parsimony. Yeah, and it also doesn't fit how things seem to be. But again, some things just don't work how things seem to be. And so that's a good point, that just because it doesn't fit how it seems with me doesn't mean it's not how things work. And that's why you got to do the science and the theorizing and figure it out. Okay, we can't step outside of consciousness because we are beings with brains, but that doesn't mean a rock or a chair has any sort of consciousness or mental process. We not being able to step out of consciousness has nothing to do with whether the world outside of our brains has mental processes or not. Kastrop made this point, and several other people made this point, and I think I just don't get the point. Because I keep saying, look, everything we view is conscious, and that is somehow a point. Well, I get it. We're conscious beings. We can only see things through our brain and through consciousness. Okay? That doesn't mean that things outside of us are also consciousness and mental. It really doesn't say that at all. It has no bearing on that. And so I don't understand what point they're trying to make, which I might just be not understanding the point, you know. Saying it is all mental isn't parsimonious, because it's not like he believes there are no complications within that mental. There are different types of mental, and you need a theory of what gives rise to different types and how some with brains disassociate it and create a self, and other mental things are just inert mental processes. There's just as much going on there, whether it's mental and material, or all material. It's not like stuff being mental gets rid of epicycles. Yeah, because an advanced theory gets rid of weird things you have to make up in order to make things fit, like epicycles whenever they're trying to figure out how our solar system worked. And so basically, a big part of the argument is it's parsimonious, and it sounds like the main way it's parsimonious, the analytic idealism, is that before you have two kinds of things. You have mental and you have material. But we're saying it's all mental, and it still explains everything. So this actually is more parsimonious, which means it's more likely to be true. And I'm like, whoa, yeah, you got rid of the material, but within your mental, you have different kinds of mental. And it's no less complicated than having material. Because if you listen to his theory, well, we have, or how things appear, materialism, it appears that you have this material stuff, and then somehow some things are conscious. And idealism, well, no, it's all mental. But of course, most things are the mental, or the universal mental, that are somehow all connected and not their own little mental things, but connected to the universal mental. But then things with brains disassociate. And while the universal mental is sort of almost a dead mental, it's just experience, these disassociated things that we are disassociated mentals, dissociated from the universal mental. Well, we have a self. We think, we feel, we care about things. We have a subconscious that works in complicated ways. We are really, frankly, a completely different kind of mental. And so, yeah, you've replaced material with universal mental, and you still have the more complicated consciousnesses. And so you still have two kinds of things. It's not any less parsimonious. I don't understand why that's, yeah, that seems like a fundamental mistake to say, oh yeah, it's less complicated because we're calling all things, it all one thing. Oh, but yeah, within that thing, we have just as complicated differences. It's just the same type of thing. Yeah, it's just, you still have, if it was a really simple model of, well, one is a two-factor universe, material and mental, they say they're replacing it with a one-factor, mental. But no, because the mental replaces the material, but you still have the disassociated consciousnesses, which is what all the mental is in the materialist world. And so it's still a two-factor universe, so I don't think you solved anything. All right, so now it's weird because it almost feels like I'm still talking to Starbops, but I'm not. I'm talking to Delphin Ferraran, who basically just picked up the conversation. All right. So this is what he said. 1. The gap isn't ignorance, it's category. Mapping every neuron, or even reproducing the behavior in silicon, gives a perfect third-person model. What it cannot, even in principle, deliver is why/that there is something it's like from the person. That's the hard problem proper. Not missing detail, but a mismatch between quantitative structure and qualitative presence. Saying, maybe we'll bridge it later, is a promissory note, not an argument. I never made the... Well, yeah, I did say... I probably said maybe we'll bridge it later. But yeah, that's not an argument. I've never claimed it was. It was... he labeled a 1, and I think I responded basically with my 1s matching. So I should be able to go 1-to-1, even though that's not totally true. Because I do read everything and then respond, so I'm sort of combining things. But I think for this, since there's so much here, I'm going to respond 1 to his 1 to my 1. The hard problem is still ignorance. We are ignorant on how material matter can create consciousness. That seeming type mismatch, and how that works is why we are ignorant. So yeah, all I'm trying to say is, what do you mean? I get he's saying, oh, well, it's fundamentally we can't possibly know how material could create quality. And again, like I said in my earlier point, I don't know if we do know that because we don't know what we're going to figure out. But even if you accept that, it's still ignorance. It's just a different type of ignorance. One is like an ignorance like, well, that we might figure out later. And then there's an ignorance that you fundamentally can't figure out. And I'm like, well, it's still something you don't understand that then you're making up something to explain something that probably isn't true. Again, that's the God of the Gap argument. I don't know if it's probably not true. But it still has... It does... I don't think his point's good there. It's still ignorance. It's just a different type of ignorance, and it's still filling in ignorance with, ooh, it's mental, which is what God of the Gap does. Okay, number 2. Idealism isn't God of the Gaps. It doesn't insert a new entity. It removes one. The extraposit of mind, independent, non-experiential stuff. The data, stable laws, shared measurements, brain experience correlations, all stay. The reinterpretation is that those regularities are the public face of mind. not evidence for a second mindless substrate behind appearances. And his second mindless substrate is the material world. So he's saying it's not evidence of that. But it is evidence of a universal mind, which is fundamentally different than our own minds. So again, I don't know how that's simplifying things. But let's see. My 2 to 2 is the universal mental is the new entity. I don't buy that is removing something. Yes, you don't have the mind, independent, non-experiential stuff, but you instead have the disassociated from the universal mental and the mind as different mental process than the simpler of what it's like to be a rock. He still believes in something other than your mind. Rather than there being a second mindless substrate, there is a second universal mind that is also kind of mindless because it doesn't think or deliberate like a human. All right, we're up to his 3. Everything is mental. Is not everything has a private mind. Chairs aren't little subjects. They have no point of view. Mental here means the intrinsic nature of the world. What it is in itself is of the same kind as experience. While physics gives the relational / structural profile, how it behaves, so one field, 2 aspects, inner phenomenal, outer physical. Rocks are in mind, not minds. And I noticed I didn't have a 3, so I can go straight to his 4 here. Why the brain matters without making it magic. On analytical idealism, brains are interfaces, complex law-like patterns in the public aspect that tightly corresponds to specific first-person patterns. Damage the interface, the available content / organization alter. That's not matter-creating mind. It's one event with 2 descriptions, like a melody, both as pressure waves and as heard music. Disassociation for subjects is the proposal by why some organizations host private points of view while most do not. 4 to 4. That sounds like magic. This staff connects to the arcane world and allows me to shoot ice bolts. Nice statement, but it's made up. We know the brain matters for creatures to be conscious, so we could conclude it is likely the brain causing consciousness, or make up a universal mind and say the brain interfaces with it and disassociates from that. We don't actually have evidence that the second thing exists, that is, the universal mind. 5. But if we could build a conscious system, 2 readings fit the same lab success. Materialist, the right physical complexity produces consciousness. Idealist, the right organizational constraints open a private perspective within the field, a new window in mind at large. The empirical upshot is identical. The metaphysics differ. Building one wouldn't decide between them because production versus partition are undetermined by the third-person data. 5 to 5. I don't know what we would learn while building this consciousness. We might learn things we can't imagine. So, I don't know, maybe I should acknowledge, I think I basically agree with what he's saying there. I'm just reiterating the point that, we don't know what we're going to learn. I might just be my IQ is too low to get it, but I feel like there is a lot of question marks of what we might learn if we're actually able to reproduce a conscious system. If we could create a human brain, we might be learning a lot of weird stuff that we can't even imagine now because it's that weird and different. And so that I feel like we got to leave open. We're going to learn stuff. But yeah, I basically agree that assuming you don't learn anything special, and hard to understand at this point of knowledge, once you do that, you don't know whether you produced it or whether you disassociated. Both theories could hold there. Okay, 6. Parsimony isn't fewer moving parts, it's fewer kinds. Fewer moving parts, fewer kinds. So it's possible I don't really understand parsimony, but I also feel like a lot of these you could just reword into fewer kinds. Especially since you could always step back a level and go, okay, though they're actually the same kind. Then go down a level and go, well, they're 2 different kinds within that kind. And what matters is whether they're both moving parts. Because you don't need to go down on that level and go, yes, they're the same kind up here, but we go within and look at that, well, they're 2 different kinds of that kind. Well, why would we do that? Well, because they're fundamentally different in some way that we got to figure out, we got to calculate for. It's fewer kinds. Materialism posits two fundamentally different kinds, non-experiential stuff plus experiential mind, and must explain their link. Idealism posits one kind, experiential, with two presentations, inner and outer. It doesn't add epicycles, it collapses a dualism. The universal mind isn't a bonus object, it's the world as it is in itself. The very thing materialism also posits, a single reality, but with an intrinsic character that actually accounts for experience. So this is something I do have trouble dealing with, is universal mind isn't like there's a third thing out there that's God and God created everything. It's no, the universal mind is everything else, all other things, and we are just disassociated from it, or else it would be it too. And they want to say that's actually not adding anything because it's actually a characteristic of everything. But certainly it seems to me that when you say, hey, there's a universal mind and it is made up of all these things, at that point, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Once you bring all those things together and say, no, this isn't a rock with atoms, this isn't a cup with atoms, this isn't a chair with atoms, these are all part of the universal mind. They're separate parts of it in some way, but they're all universal mind. You've just created a new thing by saying that they're all connected in that way. And that is a thing you got to add to your parsimony list. All right, so that's 6. Let me see if I have a 6, corresponding 6. Since he was just listing 6, I was actually matching 6 to 6. A mind that is a universal mind connected to all things, and a deliberate mind that has its own point of view, disassociated from the universal mind, are two different kinds of things. The explanation of the world has gotten no simpler. Just because they are both mind doesn't mean they are not two different kinds of things, even if they share some characteristics in common. You've got to explain the link between universal mind and conscious minds that perceive a material world. Interface or generator, it still has to be explained. Also, a full materialist would argue that conscious experience is brain states, so there is still one thing, and that one thing is probability fields that substantiate when interacting with something else. All right, 7 to 7. All right, now we're on 7. Okay, we can't step outside consciousness because brains. That's him quoting me, I guess. That explains why we personally can't get outside. It doesn't touch the logical point that all evidence and theory are given as experience. Every appeal to probability fields, detectors, or scans is itself an appeal to what appears in and to consciousness. Idealism is just refusing to smuggle a second unseen substrate behind that. Yeah, I don't see how everything he's saying here looks like he's talking about what he says he's not talking about. He says, well, that explains how we personally can't get out of it. Then he talks about how, well, everything we experience is in consciousness. Well, yeah, that's because we personally are in brains. That's the reason it's all experienced in consciousness, because we're personally in brains. That's why it's all experienced as that. I mean, even if the universal mind was true, that would be why we experience it as our consciousness, because we are part of the dissociated consciousness. Personally. Anyway, I said all evidence and theory are given as experience because we are the consciousness and subconsciousness produced by our brains. We can't experience anything not through ourselves. Idealism doesn't add a second unseen substrate behind it. It just calls this substrate universal mind instead of matter. I mean, there's material. Everything that the universal mind creates or is can't be experienced directly. It has to go through our minds to experience it. So whether it is universal mind or matter, it is an unseen substrate that we can't directly experience. Yes, we don't directly experience universal mind either. It still has to be translated into our own consciousness. So it doesn't change anything. All evidence and theory are given as experience because we can't personally get outside it. 8. On uncertainty favors materialism. Uncertainty about mechanisms doesn't privilege a few that adds a mindless base. Uncertainty about mechanisms doesn't privilege a few that adds a mindless base. Both views accommodate the same data. The idealist claim to parsimony is that it drops the extra ontological kind while preserving lawfulness, objectivity, and neuroscience. Hey, both theories have a base. One is selfless, but with mind, the universal mind. The other is mindless matter. It seems to me it is just changing the nature of what is outside us. Whether it is matter or universal mind, this is still a different thing, a different kind of thing than personal minds. 9. Quick answers to your specific worries. Do chairs feel being stabbed? No. No subject, no feeling. The field's outer pattern changes. No private perspective. It is instantiated there. How does disassociation happen? As a lawful organizational threshold. Think. Integration, segregation, constraints. That yields a private perspective. The proposal is explanatory, not mystical. Same correlations, different direction of explanation. I think I responded to that one. That explanation for how dissociation happens sounds like we have no idea other than it should be lawful and not magic. Like, we still have no idea how it works. Just like how we don't know how it's created, we don't know how it's disassociated. Other than that, he's saying, well, but how it does, it's going to be not mystical. It's going to be a lawful organization. Does idealism predict anything different? It predicts the logic of what won't be derived first-person presence from third-person quantities alone. It also predicts interface like perception, which evolutionary work on fitness over truth supports. And the principled underdetermination I noted above. Well, on this one, that we have interface like perception, yeah, materialists would predict that too. I mean, that's not a materialism versus an idealism. That's just understanding the brain. The brain isn't designed to determine truth. It's designed to keep you alive and to reproduce, because that's how it keeps existing, by staying alive and reproducing. And the best way to do that isn't always to know the truth of a thing. You got to know enough truth to stay alive, but that's about it. And yeah, but that's not a materialism versus idealism difference. If you keep materialism because it feels leaner, fair. My pitch isn't that idealism changes the lab. It changes the ground story, so the one datum we can't deny experience doesn't become the only thing the ontology can't explain. And I have a little bit more here. Idealism still sounds made up, which I know that's not a real argument, but it's not nothing. Okay, idealism still sounds made up. Anything's possible. I have no idea what matter really is. I don't think anyone does. Seems like it is probability fields that substantiate when observed, measured, or interacted with, but that seems like a partial explanation. I still don't even understand what it means to say everything is mind. Good chance I just don't understand, but also a good chance it is fundamentally incoherent. Yeah, so basically, sometimes, and this is true for a lot of things, sometimes I'm not sure whether I just don't understand something or whether the thing I don't understand actually just doesn't make sense. It's hard to tell whether, I just don't understand it yet. I need to think about it more, or learn more, or just get smarter, which is harder to do than the other things. But or whether no, it actually, the reason I don't understand it is because it actually just doesn't make sense. Sometimes it's hard to tell in general. Yeah, and so in this conversation, I'm sort of almost presented as the materialist arguing against the idealist. But although, for all practical use and possibility and thinking, I'm as if I'm a materialist. But deep down, if you ask me, when it comes to, you think it's only material? No, I don't consider myself a materialist. I consider myself I have no clue what matter is, because I realize that at the quantum level, I guess it's, and I don't know if I even understand this, but I guess it's actually all probability fields. And then they only become what we perceive as material when interacted with, measured, or observed. And also apparently time at the quantum level can be skipped. At that point, if the base is probability, that doesn't sound like material to me, and I accept that what the scientists say on that is true. So am I really a materialist if I accept that? I wouldn't just call myself a materialist. I don't really think I am a materialist. That said, for all practical purposes, I'm like a materialist. And this analytical idealism, which we have a little more conversation left, I'm not convinced by it, but I also don't think I understand it. And I also think it is very interesting. I wouldn't spend all this time on it if I just thought it was pure nonsense, unless it was like something political related, then I would, because we got to knock down bad ideas. But in this case, I think it seems like a plausible theory. I don't buy it, and I don't understand it. I don't understand the materialist worldview either. By the way, I don't know what matter is, but I do think it's interesting. All right, I think we got a little bit more here. You're noticing that both frameworks ultimately run into the same boundary. We don't know what reality is in itself, only how it behaves and appears. But here's where analytical idealism tries to make a more precise move, not a mystical one. Ignorance versus category error. You're right in that we're ignorant of how matter produces consciousness, but idealism argues the word produces is the problem. Production implies a transformation from one ontological category, non-experiential stuff, to another, experience. No increase in knowledge ever bridges that type of gap. Again, we don't know. We don't know what we're going to find out if we understand things. But anyways, no increase in knowledge ever bridges that type of gap because all knowledge is already structured within experience. So he's saying it's all structured within experience. So, we can't look inside and see what's behind what matter really is because we can only see our experience. The argument is logical, not empirical. If every datum is experiential, positing a non-experiential cause is a conceptual extrapolation, not a discovery. Okay, so basically saying all that we know exists is our experience. It's sort of a I think, therefore I am, and that is the beginning of all knowledge. And so when we're looking out there and perceiving matter, we actually can't confirm it. We can't confirm that things are material because all we have is experience. All we have is experience. We're assuming based on what our brain translates to us that it is material because my brain is telling me, hey, this is material. This is a material thing. It is different than these words going through your head and the image I'm presenting to you, which of course is an image of the material. But he's saying all we have is that image in our brain. And our brain is telling us it's material, but we can't confirm that because we can't see it directly. So all we have is that experience, and then we're trusting our brain when it tells us that this is why we're having this experience is because there's an actual material thing out here. And so a materialist says, we're adding a second thing, it's material. Now, I don't think that's that much different than saying, well, no, this isn't material, it is also mental. There's not a separate thing. But it's mental in a way different way than we have mental, because it's the universal mental, where it doesn't have a self and doesn't think or care, intervene or anything like that. It's actually considerably different than your consciousness. And so that's still a different thing. And we have no idea how you disassociate from it. To me, how you disassociate from the mental or how does the material create mental, pretty much equivalent problems. I mean, I don't care that you're calling it the same kind because you cut into that. Oh, well, it's a different kind of that kind. Oh, it's a different kind of mental. And yeah, I think I buy that our brains are not completely lying to us that this is material. But he's right. I have no idea if that's true. I mean, I could be in a matrix, But still, the claim that the universal mental is out there, yeah, so he's still making a claim about something beyond our brains. He's claiming that beyond our brains is a universal mental. If it is true, and we both agree, if it is true that we cannot experience anything outside of our brains, then that means whether what is outside of our brains is mental or matter, we have no fucking clue. And so he's just saying, oh, but theoretically this is simpler. and it fits the data better. I don't think necessarily fits the data, but this way we don't have to have matter. We just have it all be mind. All right. Anyways, did I have a 1? This one I think I started skipping. You can see I went from 1 to 4. I said a logical theory would be more convincing with key evidence. I don't see how we can gain evidence that a rock has the extended mental state of the universal mind. Okay. And then I don't respond again until 4. All right. So let's get through 4. The universal mind isn't an extra thing. It's the same ontological-based materialism already posits, a single unified reality that gives rise to all appearances, just interpreted in terms of its intrinsic nature rather than its external behavior. Materialism, one world of unconscious stuff, local pockets, brains, somehow generate mind. Idealism, one world of conscious stuff, local pockets, brain appear as associations from it. Either way, there's one reality. The difference is whether that reality is assumed to be non-experiential or experiential in kind. Okay? Sounds like magic. Fair, but note that neurons produce consciousness is just as magical unless you can explain how electrochemical fluxes become first-person experience. The only reason it's less magical is because we can see it happen. Again, I basically am jumping over I'm basically assuming that material exists when I say that, but everything our brain shows us is that's how it works. Again, our brain could be lying and it's actually all mental, and our interface is showing us as material when really it's mental. But really all we have to go on is what our brain shows us, and our brain is just showing us material, and it looks like every brain has the potential to produce consciousness. So how it does that is a great magical mystery, but that it does so regularly makes it less of a mystery and more just, oh yeah, that's how the world works. I mean, a lot of things that work over and over again feel like magic, but they become less magical once you see them work over and over again, and we've seen brains work all the time. But again, that I'm already assuming that materialism is right, and because obviously you really can't know any of that because we can't get outside and experience the material directly. We kind of just have to trust our brains, or not trust our brains and say, actually, our brains are lying and it's mental, which is possible. Okay, what part of this did I stop on before I rambled on? It redescribes what's already observed in neutral language. Brain processes and experiences are the same event, viewed from two sides, the public and the private. No spell casting required, just a change in direction of explanation. Two kinds of minds. They're not two kinds. They're 2 degrees of individuation within one field. Like eddies in water. The physics of the ocean doesn't multiply because it has many waves. Likewise, analytical idealism says there's one medium, countless self-organizing patterns, each with a local center of awareness. So he's comparing water with waves in it versus water without waves into it, to a universal mental mind that is essentially mindless but mental. It's just empty experience almost. It's just experience, but not like thoughts and hopes and dreams and stuff. And human consciousness. To me, that's a huge difference, to the point where those are really 2 different kinds of things. Well, I mean, the lake on the water, obviously it's all water. It's just one's a water with the waves and the one's different, not a wave. And the ripples on the water, you could break down on one level and say, yeah, it's 2 different kinds of things. One's a lake, and one's a lake with ripples. But we understand that that's all water molecules. You know, we understand what the eddy is, basically. We don't understand what the human consciousness is. We don't actually understand how it disassociates and how it has all the extra attributes that the mental mind doesn't have. And so I think that really breaks down the analogy to the point where it seems like it's totally different kind of thing. Yeah, universal mind with no sense of self, no ability to deliberate, no emotions, just some kind of universal experience, and a mind with a sense of self, thoughts, subconscious emotions, etc. sounds so very different that they are of different kind. You can always go back a category to say 2 things are different degrees. Even materialism and mind are all reality, so they are the kind reality, but different degrees. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that was sort of an aside. As far as parsimony goes, a conscious thinking, feeling mind is so significantly different than this universal mind that they are effectively two different things we need to believe in for this world, and it is analogous to dead matter and experience. The experience of the universal mind seems so dumbed down that it is hard to compare it to any conscious creature. It seems like a lot if sometimes when it doesn't make sense, I'm just move on. But here, it's very clear I meant is. How do I say? In this universal mind, that they are effectively two different things we need to believe in for this world. It seems like a lot is being packed into the individuation spectrum. The only difference between our brains and the universal mind is individuation. There's a lot of important attributes other than individuation that separate these things. So yes, he basically said, oh no, they're the same thing, just they're along this individuation spectrum. But the difference between the universal mind and human consciousness seems to be huge, and it seems to be on multiple levels. Not just, a little further on some sort of spectrum because it's more individuated. At some point, you're putting so much into individuated that this is not just a simple spectrum. You're creating something new of a totally different kind. Intuition can lead one astray for sure, but the idealism really feels like putting experience in places that we really have no good reason to believe have experience. It seems like experience requires a brain. Okay, this is back to him. Materialism already has one thing, matter. That's him like quoting me, but not actually quoting me, but okay, we know what it means. Yes, but matter is defined negatively as whatever is not mine. That's why the hard problem exists. Idealism keeps the unity, but gives it a positive experiential definition instead of an abstract placeholder. It's one world, but now one world includes experience by nature rather than as an inexplicable anomaly. Wait, did I get mixed up here? Okay, good. I didn't say that. 6. We can't step outside consciousness because of brains. The point is that we can't literally step outside. It's that even if we could, the very act of observation would still be an experience. There's no way around that tautology. It's epistemic, not neurological. So, yeah. He's saying, it's just simply not possible to step outside of experience. And I don't think that point is, he says not neurological, but that's because what we are experiencing beings with a bunch of other stuff, complicated experience. And so if we say, let's step outside of ourselves and observe, well, that's still an experiencing being. So we just created a new experiencing being for us to experience. Yeah, I don't really know what actual point we're even was being made, like behind that point. Which is probably why I'm confused. When we are imagining us stepping outside of ourselves, we are imagining that we are still experiencing creatures like we are. But if we really could step out of being an experiencing creature, we couldn't observe the world at all because only experiencing things can experience. I don't understand what the original point was. 7. Castro said the universal mind feels like the chair being stabbed. Right, but that's shorthand for saying any change in physical form corresponds to change in an intrinsic aspect of the field. The feeling here isn't emotional. It's the bare experiential side of transformation. I personally disagree with the framing of his words on this one, but the logic behind it still holds. A dead experience without anything else going on is hard to imagine. Seems like a pretty thin difference between no experience and a dead, empty experience. Yeah, it's hard for me to get my mind around even what the universal mind is experiencing. Which is one of those things where is it because it's just hard to get your head around it, or is it because it's fundamentally incoherent, or is it because it's I don't know, such a limited experience that it's, yeah, it might just be hard to get your head around. I don't know, but I have trouble when you say, what is this universal mind experiencing? I have no clue. Okay, so idealism feels made up. That's healthy doubt. The best way to approach it is not as belief, but as a hypothesis about coherence. Hypothesis about coherence. You don't have to accept that everything is mind. Only notice that everything known is known within mind. true. I think that materialism would accept that, though. The theory says that maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe that's structure. Okay. Oh, it's not really a coincidence. It's just we're mind creatures. It's not a coincidence that everything we experience is mind. It's because we are mind creatures, and that's our only possible way for us experiences in our minds. So I won't say that's a coincidence. I don't think that's what coincidence means. Okay, I get that everything known is mind within mind, but I don't see how that extends to everything has mind. Shouldn't the double split experience show a consistent result if there was a universal mind? The universal mind is already observing everything, so experimenters measuring the particles shouldn't change anything. Now, I think this is actually, we've already done it, and I can tell because it says 1 day ago and this says 2. So this is YouTube being weird and showing me stuff I've already seen. And that, I think, is what I just had. It's going to end with my question. Well, we heard me say that already. Yep, we already read that. We already read that. Okay. I think someone else came and commented somewhere in here, but it was basically similar stuff. I think we got the picture. This is one of those things where it's not really the emphasis of this channel. I'm more on the kind of social science, politics, economics, even religion and stuff. And it's also a thing where, let's say I was fully convinced. I am now an analytic idealist. I think everything is mine, as Kastrup explains. How does that change my view in anything else? It doesn't. I'd be like, it doesn't. Oh, so I thought the underlying reality of the world was matter. It's actually all mind. But all the other things that science discovered, yes, some underlying truth of what matter is different, but that all still basically works the same. Any moral thinking would still be the same. It doesn't really adjust that at all. So that means any way politics works, what's the best policy wouldn't change, whatever is right or wrong for my own action doesn't change. It doesn't matter. It fundamentally doesn't matter. But it is very interesting. And maybe there's ways it matters that I don't know about. Or maybe if you understand it like that, there would be a way to advance science in a way that's hard for me to imagine. But as far as anything else, it doesn't matter. So I assume it would show up here if that was this video.
Lone candles there.
This is a different video. We'll look at that later.
Who's the main?
Get rid of that. All right. Yeah. So it fundamentally doesn't matter. I mean, in some ways, or in any ways, it's going to affect any other part of my life or my thinking. And I don't claim to understand it. And I don't even claim to understand the materialist worldview. I don't even consider myself a materialist, although for all practical thinking, I'm a materialist. But like deep down, I don't know what reality is. And so I don't consider myself a materialist even. But, well, hopefully that was interesting for the millions of you watching at home. That's all I had in that one. It is the weekend. I'm going to party hard this weekend because I'm a bit of a partier. I'm a big party guy, you know. I like to get out. I like to dance. I like to get with all the chicks and the dudes and the people in between. I just party hard. That's me. I'm a party hard guy. I'll probably be asleep by 9:30 though. You know, I get tired. End stream.